correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to Me and Steve. I'm Steve, as usual, and unfortunately only one Steve tonight because the other Steve is feeling under the weather, but we've got a pretty cool show lined up for you, and we'll get into that right after I tell you about our D20 Network Podcast of the Week, which this week is the Court Games family of podcasts, which are all about Legend of the Five Rings. They actually have three podcasts on the network, one called Court Games, one called Fortune and Strife, and one called Crimson Gold Agonies. The first, Court Games, is interviews and talk with designers, talk about the game. I think they also talk some about the card game, and so on and so forth. Now, they have two actual play podcasts, one being Fortune and Strife, the other Crimson Gold Agonies. One is done very much more in an audio drama style, where they take out all the table talk, dice rolls, etc. And the other, and they're separate campaigns, but the other is done much more as a kind of demo thing where they leave in, rules discussion, dice rolls, so you can kind of pick up a little more of how the game is played. So if you're interested in any of those, you can check them out. I'll put links in the show notes. Main website is courtgamespod.com. But yeah, like I said, or, go to D20 Network, click on the podcast tab, scroll down, you'll find those and a lot more great shows there. Anyway, so one of the things Steve and I have been wanting to do is dive a little more into Supers games. And to that end, we're kind of going to try and do a little bit of a series here. And to kind of kick this off, we've brought on Michael Surbrook, who is a game designer, writer, who's, well, I guess, do you primarily work in the Prowlers and Paragons family? Is that fair to say?
Right now. I started out, though, in Champions.
Okay.
And did a lot of work with Champions, both on the oddly enough, not a lot of superhero content for Champions, but I did work in the hero system across the genre board. I did do I created Kaze 5 was my first published work, which was actually more anime cyberpunk. I was influenced by all the VHS tapes I watched in the 90s of Bubblegum Crisis and Appleseed and Battle Angel and Akira, which technically is superheroic level at times.
Anime especially tends to go that way.
Yeah, and then I did Ninja Hero, the 5th edition version of Ninja Hero, which also included superhero level characters, and then did some fantasy content, and then did some third-party work for a couple other companies involving hero system stuff. But I also contributed to Haymaker, which included superhero characters and other material, and contributed to Digital Hero. So, I mean, I cut my teeth gaming on superheroes. I played a lot of Champions, and then more accurately, Hero System from like 84 to 2010-ish. And then I played a lot of some other stuff in between. And then recently I've been playing running Prowlers and Paragons on several online games using my setting that we're going to talk about, Well of the Worlds, which, as someone described it the most at Genghis Khan a couple of weeks ago, he said, I don't like supers, but this is fantasy supers, and this is really awesome. I really like this idea. So in effect, it's a superhero system, and the setting has people with superhuman powers, but it's not a costume supers setting, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. And I know there are other games, especially I think, maybe more recently, most people, when you say supers game, yeah, you think cartoons, MCU, DC, whatever.
Right.
But there's a lot of games out there, be it from Pelgrane's Mutant City Blues to the stuff from Arc Dream, like Godlike, that are super powered individuals, but in very different settings.
Yes. Yes. Well of the Worlds is one of the problems we're going to have is I don't want to give away too much about it. It is very much well. Let's settle what it is in a broad stroke. So, Well of the Worlds, I found out when we really started to explore it because I first created it for Champions, and I first ran it probably 10 years ago, thereabouts. And if anybody knows Champions, for those who don't, it's a point-based system game. A superhero is built on, let's say, 300 to 400 points, depending on your power level. Some of the stuff you see in the MCU, maybe those are 800 point characters. Stuff that you saw in the Netflix shows, those are 300 point characters. Gives you an idea of street level to cosmic level. It is a massively flexible system. You can do just about anything you want in it. I spent a lot of time creating characters based on popular IP. I first started out by converting all the manga I was reading because nobody had ever heard of it. And I thought, here, let me show you this cool character. And then I might watch, what was it, The Good, the Bad, the Weird, or The Mummy, and be like, here's Brendan Fraser as Rick O'Connell with everything he can do that you see him do in the show. Here is all these characters. But that flexibility is also one of its big drawbacks. You can get really caught up in minutia and numbers and stats, and everything is just point, point, point. You have to buy everything. And if you don't buy it, you can't do it. So it has a bit of a limit. But it was massively popular in the 80s. Let's get this straight. When it came out, it was a huge game changer. I mean, it influenced GURPS. It influenced a number of other systems. I don't remember all of them, but a number, especially point-buy systems and such, and the way you did it. It was hugely influential. Problem is, it didn't change with the times, and I'm serious. Its sixth edition made things even more crunchy, more granular, and then they did something called Champions Now, which I didn't. I tried to read the book and gave up very quickly, and I think it just came and went, and it didn't really change anything. But it was huge, and I really enjoyed playing it and running it and being in a Champions Hero System game. But all things must pass. But I originally ran the game in Champions, and people started out, I said, you build a normal person. I want a normal, everyday guy from the world around us. And I ended up with a character that was 10 points and some guy that was 120 points. And I was like, okay, you also have to have a secret dream or wish or desire. And one player knew exactly where I was going. And he said, in my dreams, I fly. And another character said, well, I wish the world was like my sketchbook. I could erase it and start over, and so on. And I took that, and basically every session they got a new character sheet, and the character sheet would have new abilities, their stats would go up. They might have new skills and superpowers. And by the end of the game, some of these guys were 500-point characters who could stop time because they wanted life to be like their character, their sketchbook. They could stop something and start over. So something bad that happens, they could reverse that. And so they had superhuman powers. They could fly at super speeds. They could lift great weights. They were jumped great distances. They were, powerful hand-to-hand combatants and all that. But they didn't have costumes. They didn't have superhero names. They were, in the parlance of the setting, wonder workers, which meant they were akin to culture heroes. They were like Hercules or Gilgamesh or Kuklian or Hiawatha or characters whose names I'm never going to remember, but I can think of the guy in Japan that actually, realistically, they believe he actually sank a boat with an arrow. Got a really lucky shot in a weak plank, and then it drifted with the waves, and the broken plank went down, and the water came in, and he sank it. But he apparently, as far as can be told, he really did that. So those kind of characters is what we're talking about. People who are looked upon as not superheroes, but people, like I said, culture heroes or demigods or something like that.
Almost high-level folk heroes in a way, if from
Very much, very much.
a future lens, I guess is a way to say it.
Right. I mean, one of my hero products, which was almost superheroes, was called Larger Than Life, in which I gave you champion stats for Paul Bunyan and Joe Magaratz and John Henry, and those guys are practically superheroes. So yeah, they are culture or folk heroes doing the crazy stuff. So it turns out that what I had created, and before I'd ever heard of the term, is an isekai game, which is the Japanese genre of alternate or otherworld adventure, which I've looked at almost none of it. I know Sword Art Online and Overlord and a slew of other titles and both anime and manga use that premise, often of people getting sucked into the game world that they're playing, the MMO, where you find out I'm no longer playing World of Warcraft, I'm in it. So I was inspired by an anime called El Hazard, which is probably one of the very first of those, which in turn admitted they were inspired by John Carter of Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So
It sounds vaguely like Joel Rosenberg's Guardians of the Flame series in a way, too.
I've never even heard of that. The three things that heavily influenced me were El Hazard, John D. Chansey's Castle Perilous novels, and Philip Jose's Farmer's World of Tears, all of which involve in the West what we call portal fantasy, which is John Carter, which is also known as Sword and Planet, or Planetary Romance, our Chronicles of Narnia, Doomfayers of Coromundee, the Lego movie when you get right down to it, because Emmett gets hauled into all these other worlds and discovers he's got great power. So that is what the Well is. The Well is people, if you use this core plot setup, is people from Earth, our Earth, or so they may think, end up in a world, an alternate world, and soon slowly discover they have powers and they need to, and what do they do with those powers? And that's sort of the question. Now, there's a meta plot that I'm using. I'm running 3 online games, all using the same plot. It's basically me. Like one guy said, oh, I've run Curse of Strahd 19 times. I'm like, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm taking this story plot that I originally ran face to face for my hero group, and I ran it again for a PMP group to get a feel for PMP. And I said, okay, I want to take a step up, and I ran it online, ran a complete game, and now I'm running 3 other groups, including a Twitch show, through this same campaign, which is great because every time somebody runs through it, I can add more detail. And eventually I want to take what I have and create a source book that you can run players through this beginning to end, covers everything you need to know campaign, called Against the Masters of the World. Because it turns out that this paradise-like world that you're in has some dark secrets. And of course, you being the people with powers, or you being the protagonist, you're the PCs, things will happen to you and you're drawn into a major conflict, which will determine the fate of the world.
Cool. Sounds very interesting. So let's take a little bit of a step back here. And I'm not personally familiar with Prowlers and Paragons, other than I've seen a decent amount of talk about it. But I really don't know much about the game system itself or any of that, other than I've seen a couple character sheets, and it appears to use some form of a dice pool.
It does. It's a dice. It's like, the only other game that I've actually played, well, I've played a couple of dice pool games now that I think about it. Iron Claw is a dice pool game. If you've never played it, the dice, it's like Savage Worlds. You have 4 to 20, and you grab every single die that applies to what you're doing, and you roll it, and you count, and successes are 4 or better, and you count your successes, and it's, once again, it's opposed successes are you rolling against a target number. Shadowrun does the same thing.
Free League's engine is similar.
Savage Worlds does it on a very small scale. What PMP does is everything is a dice pool. Your stats, your skills, your powers are all expressed by a dice pool. And so it's a versus system. I roll my dice, you roll your dice, you determine your successes. You can play it binary. Most successes win. Okay. Or you can play it more narrative, which is the more successes you have, the more control you have over the narrative. Now, the one thing I stress at times when I'm running the game is I say, look, your target number was 3. You got a 6. You got 3 more successes than you needed. You have total control of the narrative. What did you do? It's very much like Matt Mercer's, how do you want to do this? But I can apply it to any action you do, and I can't negate it. Now, I may say you only made it by 1. The narrative is yours, but I can add something to it. I can't take it away from you, but I can add another element. And a classic example is sort of like that scene from the first Matrix movie. Everybody's leaping across the rooftops chasing Trinity. And if this was a PMP game, Trinity may leap, and I say, look, it's a target number of 3. Roll your agility to jump. And it's like, I got 4 successes. Well, you got 1 more than you needed, so you made the jump, but now the roof is crumbling, and that agent is right behind you. So I can't take what you do away, but I can add that. Now I will note that personally, I try not to do that a whole lot because if it's a one-on-one game, that would be awesome. We'd constantly be back and forth, and we'd be building narrative back and forth and adding elements and playing off of them. But in a 6-player game, I'm not going to do that. I mean, now if I won't do that all the time. If a player does something, like in the last game that I ran, a character saw a cute little what we call scavenger birds. It looked like somebody took a mouse and gave it furry with wyvern wings, and it's walking around like a wyvern did in The Hobbit. And she's like, I wanna entice it. And I said, give me a charm roll. And I said in my head like a difficulty of like 2 or 3 because it's a wild animal. She gets 6. And I was like, oh, you know what? Tell me how you entice this into your hand. And she like, and now she has a sidekick. I mean, I'm going to tell her, you can put points into having a sidekick for Jack the Scavenger Bird. But on the other hand, somebody may, in a fight, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, no, you missed, you hit, whatever. I'm not going to I'm not going to slow everything down by trying to play that game.
Mm-hmm.
If you were doing a one-on-one game and you really wanted to simulate, say, a martial arts scene like the fencing that you see in Princess Bride or any Chinese or Japanese sword or martial arts movie, you could actually do that. You got 1 over his evasion, so you did hit him and did a point of damage. But and you could play it that way. And Len himself in the book says, look, you can either play with the narrative element or you can play it binary. It's really up to how the GM feels.
So now, when you're talking about this, like combat or whatever, are they opposed roles, so to speak, where the GM has the pool for the NPC or whatever, and so the player is trying to beat the number of successes that you as the GM roll?
Yes. For example, let's be generic about. Well, let's say I don't know, Superman is fighting Wonder Woman. I don't know why. So Superman is going to use his might. Now, he's a cosmic level guy. He's rolling like 25 dice of might. Wonder Woman is going to use whatever her best defense is. It could be agility. It could be her armor, defined as her bracers. It could be pure toughness. It could be martial arts. She is much more martially inclined than he is. They still do the same amount of damage, just slightly different ways of doing it. And so, he declares, I roll this. I get this many successes. I look at my best defense. I roll those dice. I get that many successes, and we compare. Now, this makes it very fast play. Unlike, say, Champions. Champions was I rolled a hit. I roll my damage. Did I succeed your defenses, which you have to subtract from, and blah, like that. And if you were doing more realistic, it was I rolled a hit. Did your armor activate? So there could be 3 or 4 dice rolls. And I know Shadowrun was like that. I roll, I soak, or I roll my defenses and I roll to soak. There was a couple ways. And here it's one-on-one, boom, I roll, you roll. Now you can modify those rolls. Both of us have a currency. Players have resolve. I have adversity that they can use to modify the rolls if they have it and if they want to use it. You can re-roll. You can add dice. You can explode dice if possible. So it's not fully static. And there's maneuvers you can do. You can. It's not like old school D&D, which was I roll, you roll, I roll, you roll, and it was it was just I want to do this. Well, that's presumed in your attack roll that you're doing something fancy. You can try to do different maneuvers and techniques. Not a whole lot, not like Champions that had a huge list, but Champions once again is way more granular in how it does damage in combat. But I think it works well enough. It's a lot quicker. And it's a lot simpler. And once you get the hang of it, boom, go. You can. I've run big fights in the 3 to 4 hour sessions that I do online. In one session, that would have taken an immense amount of time in Champion. Now, I don't know about Mutants and Masterminds or certain other super systems, but I know it would take an immense amount of time in some of the systems that I know because it's a lot more streamlined and smoother. And that's one thing I really like about it.
Mm-hmm. You see, in let's call it traditional supers play, my only experience is a couple sessions of Mutants and Masterminds. But I was very fortunate in that the GM that I played with knows the system frontwards, backwards, upside down, sideways, and literally like on the pre-gen sheets he's giving us, it has all the different things statted out. So he's just like, roll, add this, what's your number? Okay, that's this many. Like the guy is virtually a human calculator when it comes to mutants and masterminds.
Right. And I know my convention game sheets for PMP, I try to have everything figured out, noted what it is that you're rolling and what it means. Because any supers game, I mean, a lot of people want rules light. And I know there's some extreme rules light supers games out there, but I personally think that because supers incorporates fantasy and science fiction and, weird science and psychics and aliens and all these powers that you can do, you need it. There's a certain level of crunch that's going to be in there because you have to make sure all this works together.
Mm-hmm.
GURPS, GURP Supers, Mutants, Masterminds, Hero, even Savage Worlds, PMP, whatever you're playing, you have to deal with the fact that somebody can throw a shield, somebody can throw a hammer with lightning, somebody can be throwing hex bolts, somebody can be shooting arrows, somebody can be shooting a gun, somebody can be fighting with fists and hands, and somebody can be moving at 1,000 miles an hour, and you have to make all that work. So the really crazy super rules light super systems out there, I think I don't know, there's Icons and Bash and all these other ones. I don't know how rules light some of those are. But some of them, when they start talking about how minimalistic they are, I don't know how well they're going to work, and I don't know how well they work for long games. So I've really come to find that PMP, though, works very well for me. And I should note that. Somebody may be a huge Icons or Bash or GURP Supers fan, and I'm like, great, if it works for you, it was not working for me, but this system does.
Well, and I think to me, that's one of the beauties of the modern gaming environment that we're living in, is that there are games out there. If you prefer rules light, if you want to go crunchier, if you want somewhere in the middle, that there are titles out there, so we can all find a game that works for us.
Right. I know some people have turned away from mutants because they like that, what you're talking about, the modifiers and the crunch, and they're like, no, it gets to be too much. And they're looking at PMP and saying that it gives me just enough crunch but also gives me fast play. I mean, let me give you another example about why I like PMP. If we're playing D&D or Pathfinder or Champions and we get into a fight, we get into the equivalent of Captain America in the elevator fight scene in Winter Soldier. In Champions, D&D, I don't know about Savage Worlds, but D&D, Pathfinder, probably Mutants, Masterminds, I don't know. I mean, but those three, every single one of those guys is a character sheet, or at least a stat block. They all have hit points or body or stun or whatever, and they have to be fought individually. You cannot make like the Thing and just scoop up a bunch of goblins in D&D and give them a crushing hug and throw them aside. You have to fight them one-on-one. With PMP, everybody except for the guy becomes Crossbones is a minion. So they're a group represented by a single die roll. There are dice. So when that fight starts, I could tell you how some of that might go as a PMP GM. I could say like, well, if they're a bunch of minions, how do they get his hand magnetized to the wall? And I'm like, oh yeah, because the GM inflicted a misfortune. He goes, yeah, they got a magnet on you. Now I've inflicted a misfortune meaning you only fight with one hand and you can't use this ability. But he still can use his martial arts to fight all of those minions at once. And he takes out so many in such a short period of time because his dice pool versus their dice pool, he's taken out one enemy for every success he gets. So in one die roll, he may take 3 or 4 guys down, which is I kick him, I slam him into him, I grab this other guy and throw him into him, and next thing you know, the bunch of them are laying down on the ground. And then, he does this and he does this, and then he fights a super minion or super mook, which is Crossbones, who doesn't have a full character sheet yet, but he's got multiple dice pools. He's got like an attack and a defense one, and he still puts them down pretty quick because this is Captain America. But I can run fights like that where you fight an army, and I can say, well, there's about 10 groups of 50, and then there's 5 guys who are foes, and there's 1 villain. And it becomes everybody has the same stat block except for the villain, and I'm just marking off like circles as I go. And I'm like, okay, so you were doing, I think Captain America, because he fights minions or mobs a lot, where he dives into a bunch of them, or even Black Widow jumps in a bunch of guys, and next thing you know, half of them are down on the ground. and they can't touch her because she's moving too quick and such. The other thing I like about this is that the minion rule means you can't hurt Superman. So in Champions, I want to be completely bulletproof. You would have to have ridiculous defenses because of the stun lotto and modifier and some other elements. In this one, it's like, well, I have 24 dice of armor. Well, guess what? These guys are threat level 6. They're not even close to half your armor. They can't touch you no matter what weaponry they have. And the idea being is 20 guys with 9mm handguns are do not do any more damage than one guy with a 9mm handgun. So you can do I walk through a hail of bullets or arrows or such and just have them bounce off of you, because the idea of what they call rank or dice level or the threat level is built in to determine how combat works, which is another way that makes things awesome. I ran a game recently where the guy has like 10 dice of armor, and I said, Dawn Morgan, your character, whenever the minions come around you, you're immune. They can't hurt you. They may shoot at you or throw arrows or stones or whatever, but they can't hurt you because their threat level is less than half of your ability. Now, the fun part is minions do not stop. You can make 12 die minions. That would be, let's fight all of those Ultron clones at the end of Ultron. I get 14 successes. I took out 2. I threw my shield at 2 guys and I took out 2, or whatever. But you can see now how you can keep scaling that up. And so after a while, Doom. There's a dozen Doom bots. They could be minions. Especially, the joke is if Doom's not even there, they're minions. If Doom's there, then there may be foes. And foes can have full stat blocks, but half health. And super mooks can be like just a couple of dice pools. I realize we've gone on a tangent and you may be a little lost, but the idea being the dice pool mechanic makes it very simple to run big battles with all sorts of people, because you don't have to worry about a dozen character sheets. I can actually have most everything on one character, including vehicles, on one sheet of paper, and just track what they're doing and how they're affecting them, because I don't need those big champions or GURPS or D&D character sheets that show all these different abilities. And no, it's all streamlined down into one thing.
Well, it sounds like part of what's going on to me is that, how do I want to say this? It's like, it's very flexible in that situationally you can adjust what, like we'll just say AIM agents, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you need them to be there and be a nuisance, you set them here as, one big group of whatever. But depending on what you want them to do, you can elevate them to be more dangerous AIM agents, less dangerous AIM agents, etc., without having to grab a whole new stat block.
Right. When you're dealing, so like I said, minions are one value. It's their threat. And you use that for everything. So, for example, I'm trying to think here. 1 is normal, 2 is 3 is trained, 4 is professional, 6 is pushing superhuman. So, for example, top end Hydra agents in the MCU with heavy body armor and energy weapons and such like that would be levels D6 or 6 die threat. But if Iron Man has 12 dice of armor or 14 dice of armor, they can't hurt him because he has more than twice their threat. Now, they can still damage people except for Iron Man, because he's got all that armor and it's passive, so he's wearing armor. Because the more of them together they are together that attack one hero, they get a gang up bonus because more weapons are coming at you. So this is where the trade-off comes, or this is where the rule comes, though, that if their base threat is less than half of your passive armor, then they can't hurt you, because it doesn't matter how many guns are pointed at Superman. If they're not carrying Superman level weaponry, they're not going to hurt him.
Okay.
And then I can say, hey, these guys over here have high end, let's hurt Iron Man weaponry. And I can build them as really super mooks. Or I can say they're kind of fragile on the defense, but they're really heavy on offense. And I give them 12 die blast. That's their power, but 6 die toughness. That's their defense. So if they tag Iron Man, they can knock him around. But if he fires a repulsor ray, he'll probably put him right out, because they're still only normal people. But you can do this. This is how you do like some of the sequences you see in certain anime where you're like, these guys all have armor, like heavy armor, but they fall down in droves to the hero. Yeah, because they're just minions. And even though they're heavily armored, it's for show, air quote show here. And so you get that, like, why does anybody wear armor in Game of Thrones if the hero just carves right through them? Because they're minions and he's the hero and he has the ability to just, wipe them out. The other cool thing, though, is that threat is against anything you do against him. If you throw an entangle, if you're Spider-Man and your ensnare, your webbing, does more than their threat. They're webbed to the wall into the end of the action scene. If you have mind control, you can mind control a bunch of them. So it's the great thing is that unlike Champions, it was horrible. I wanted to mind control that agent, and it just took forever to do it. Seemingly do anything to that. No, you can grab like 10 or 12 guys and be like, do my bidding. And I recently had a combat where it was like guy throws an entangle grenade or a webbing grenade or whatever. Ensnare is the power called in PMP. And I was like, oh, well, you just took out 5 guys and they're not going anywhere because you did more than their threat and they're out to the end of the scene. And I thought that was awesome.
So what I'm kind of hearing is that P&P is really designed for the big, bold brushstrokes of cinematic action. Is that fair, or it's good at that?
It is designed, well, okay, the core rules are designed around what I would call 4-color action. Nobody dies unless you really plot it out. So it's more designed for classic comic books. The MCU, the DCU, most superhero shows involve a level of death and injury that go beyond what PMP normally does. Now, PMP has gritty rules. If you want to play the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or you want to play Punisher or that sort of thing, you can. There's rules for like death and dying and firing into melee and this kind of a thing where it's a little bit more gritty. But yeah, PMP is really good at that sort of cinematic action. And I say cinematic, we should say your classic comics, your classic animated DC animated, Marvel animated shows, Batman Beyond or Batman the Animated Series, that kind of thing, are some of the MCU and DCU where because we've been talking a lot about minions, but heroes versus villains is slightly different. They can have all the same. They can have a full suite of powers. They can have full suite of abilities. They can have full health, and I can have adversity and everything. And so that turns into more of your classic one-on-one battling of superpower versus superpower and such. I was sort of talking a lot about minions because that's one thing I'm enamored with. I don't have to be afraid of having a bunch of agents in the field along with some villains or such, because it's very easy to run all that together as compared to some other. When I was running Champions, it would be a nightmare. I mean, I could do it, but I wouldn't want to do it online.
Well, but like, I guess what I'm hearing you describe is, like, so to speak, you can have that panel where, Cap throws the shield, knocks out 17 guys, and then has a 5-page knockdown drag out with the villain, and without having to stat out all kinds of crazy stuff.
Right. And there are powers in the book that allow you to be the guy whose job is to destroy minions. There's one called Two-Fisted, which can be, it's the Shadow with a gun in each hand. It's Wolverine with his claws. It's Cap throwing a shield, maybe, although I think he has that. It's Black Widow or Batman has it, where they dive into a bunch of guys and there's a flurry of blows, and next thing you know, half of them are out on the ground. And there's rules for that actually make you an even better destroyer of AIM agents or Hydra agents or Cobra agents or Viper agents or whoever. So there's that. And then there's other powers like, oh, by the way, every effect powers knock out twice as many agents, per success and things. So yeah. And then when you're fighting one-on-one, the use of resolve and adversity and some other elements may make this fight go on. I actually told a guy in the last big battle I ran, he got into a fight with a villain that was our foe that was about his power level, a little bit tougher, mainly because and all that. And they fought without really hurting each other, because they were mainly grappling. But I thought it was amazing. It was 6 pages, and a page is a turn of combat, of them standing in a fire pit with flames and smoke and ash all around them, trying to get one down and slam him into the ground. And everybody else is battling around them and defending and attacking all the other foes and minions and characters. And these two are going at it, and it was amazing because they were so close, and that our die rolls kept getting so close they couldn't get one. Finally, and it was cinematic, amazing. Like you said, it was a 5-page fight scene between Captain America and Batroc the Leaper, or Batman and, I'm trying to think of like, Deathstroke, type deal. And he tied that guy up. He kept that guy from trouncing any of his fellows who probably were not able to deal with this guy the way he could. It was amazing.
Yeah, well, no, but I like that because it I don't know, it just seems like it works really well.
It
You know,
does.
but to go back, and to me, you've kind of touched on this a little bit. So, but what I'm hearing you say is that P&P also does very well with like the different levels, because even if we're talking, quote unquote 4-color comic book supers, you've got everything from the Agents of Shield, you mentioned like the Netflix or the CW shows, up to the MCU, DC, or Superman, Avengers. And as someone who's a fan of games, but I wouldn't consider myself a game designer by any right, it seems that supers, because you have this vast disparity of power levels, that supers games must create a rather unique challenge for a designer to be able to accommodate all of that and make it all interesting.
So this is how P&P does it, and this is something I find very brilliant. So P&P has 2 things that you look at when you decide on your campaign. The first is your point total, which determines your dice cap. So for the game that I'm running on Twitch, we've had one session. Everybody's really excited. I said, you're building a 50-point character with a 6 die cap. What that means is you have 50 points to build your character, no powers unless you want. I mean, no superpowers. You could have martial arts, you could speak multiple languages and things. And you have a 6 die cap. Nothing you have can go over 6 dice. Yeah, it would be any of your abilities, that would be any of your skills, or anything else that you can do. And if nothing that you have reaches 6 dice, you automatically get something called resolve, because you're less powered than the dice cap. Now, because everybody's making normal humans, pretty much everybody had a few dice. I joked with one guy, I said, you're going to be everybody's friend. You actually have 8 resolve, which is the max you can have, because he didn't know what to spend points on. And I said, that's fine. I'll take those points you haven't spent and apply them to your milestone when you power up, and you'll have more points to plug into that. And one guy admits he's a munchkin, and he practices mat cutting, which is the Japanese art of cutting mats. And so he actually hits the dice cap and doesn't have any resolve. So how that applies when you level up is you go 6, 8, 10, 12, 18, 25 dice. But because Superman is at maxed out, he's 25 dice of might and armor and all this other stuff, Batman can compete with him, because Batman goes, look, I have maybe 12 to 18 dice in anything I can do, and you're at 24 or 25, you're at the max. I'm 6 or 8 dice below you. I get 2 resolve for every die below you. So when Len made the Justice League, he has 36 resolve. He has poker chip piles of resolve, and Superman has like 1, because he gets something called determination, which means he always gets 1 resolve.
Mm-hmm.
We won't go into how to earn resolve. This is a simple part. But what this means is that Batman is like, I can't punch the guy Superman can punch. I can't run as fast as Flash. I can't fight with a sword like Wonder Woman can. I can't shoot arrows like Green Arrow. But I can use all of this resolve to boost what they're doing, to allow them rerolls, to get lucky breaks and know things, to boost my own die rolls, to add to my dice, to add to their dice, because he can be kind of like Battlefield Commander in that, and therefore he can compete on a level with them. And also, he can use his dice to power some of his powers, like resolve to power some of his powers. So he goes, I'm going to spend a resolve. And you know what? I'm prepared. I've researched Starro. I know that we need this thing that I just so happen to have in my utility belt. You see this to a silly degree in the old TV show, but in a more serious game, he can say, or the player can say, I'm going to spend a resolve to, do this or power that or activate this power. And he has mountains of it. So he can buff in a way or benefit everybody around him and therefore compete with them in the same fight, in the same scene, because he has all of that resolve. And when Wonder Woman or Superman runs out, they only have a few due to their flaws and due to determination. He can basically back them up and say, well, I've still got. And so he is very relevant to the game, even though he can't deliver the same amount of damage or dice in an attack that they can.
I mean, kind of akin to like Hawkeye running with the Avengers.
Well, yeah. Now the funny thing is I would say Hawkeye's arrow skill is ridiculous because remember, he just didn't look and shot an arrow into the air and sure, Loki catches it and it still blows up. So his offensive skill is really high. Defense is not so much, but he makes, like, he and Black Widow made up for it by saying, look, I've got lots of points left over. I'm just going to buy determination because that's what allows me to keep up with the guys who are true superhumans.
Okay.
You can get resolve, even if you start out with 0 resolve, you can get resolve through, a cool plan, really cool role play, vignette scenes. You can do a little scene maybe to illustrate something about your character. Flaws can give you resolve. Superman has one because he has Lois Lane out there. He has Lex Luthor out there. So he should have at least 2 just because of that. There's ways that you can always start with a little bit of resolve. Enemies, I think it's called relationship. You have to try to remember for what it is. And then you can also earn resolve by taking flaws that when you use them once per scene and they cause a problem, you get a resolve for that. The Thing being super heavy, for example, he could say, or having unluck or something like that. You could say, well, I'm really heavy and I fall through the floor and make a really bad, literally make a bad first impression. I'm like, well, here's a resolve for playing up the fact that you're the Thing and feel you're a monster. And every time you do something normal, something breaks. But you can then use that, to do something cool later on.
Okay. No, I like that. So yeah, it lets lower powered characters still play on the same level as higher powered characters, which sounds
So for example, if I don't know, you bring in Daredevil from the Netflix show, he's maybe 8 dice, maybe 10, but you pair him up with the Avengers, where you've got guys who are probably throwing 12, minimum of 12, and probably pushing 18 to 24 dice. The player's like, well, how do I compete? I'm like, well, here's your mountain of resolve that you can use to augment everything you do. And I've had that in a Well of the Worlds game where I've had somebody come in midway through the game to replace somebody who's left, and they get the same 50-point starting character as everybody else. And I'm like, well, everybody else, you're at 6 dice, everybody else is at 10 or 12, so here's your 6 or 8 resolve that you're going to start with that you can use to help them or maybe, augment whatever you do. And even if there's not a fight, they can use that for various things. And they're like, okay, so I may not have all the powers they do, but I have a huge resource of dice manipulation chips and lucky break chips and things that I can use to be useful this session. And then usually I power them up pretty quickly, and that most of that will go away. But they don't care now; they got superpowers.
Mm-hmm. So now, we keep talking about I'm assuming these are like D6 in these dice pools.
Yes.
Okay, and you're just looking to, like, you're counting 4+ or 5+, or does that depend on the situation?
Well, Len has you count evens 2, 4, 6.
Okay.
But as I've told people, I don't care how you count them because some people are used to like Shadowrun and miniatures games, and they go, "Can I just count 4, 5s, and 6s?" I'm like, whatever. The rule is 3 results have to be 0, 2 results are 1, and 1 result is 2, and you just have to be consistent. Now, I have P&P dice that have 3 blank sides, 2 silver sides, and a gold side. So I just roll that and I count those successes, and I know that the goal is 2 successes, and I can tell you a value pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a very simple dice pool system.
Okay. Oh, that sounds really cool. I may have to try this out at some point because it sounds like you're saying it's got enough crunch that you don't feel that kind of wishy-washiness of something like maybe the Powered by the Apocalypse one about teens, Masks.
Yeah.
Um which again, I don't know that it's really about supers. That's just the skin they put on the teen angst story they want to tell.
Yeah, I isn't Art something also from them where you play like monsters or something?
Oh, Monster Hearts?
Huh?
Monster Hearts. I think they're both Magpie, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know, the only PTA or Powered by the Apocalypse game I've ever played was a couple sessions of Threadbare at Genghis Khan, which was a lot of fun, but it's also very much it's all heavily relationship based. It's,
Mhm,
the person across from you, next to you, which doesn't work. For example, it wouldn't work for a well game because everybody could be strangers. In my
mhm,
Twitch game, 2 people know each other, nobody else knows anybody except for, so there's 2 people who were together on the flight, and everybody else is their own person. So any of those games where you're supposed to start out with a previous history and you have linkage to each other, I'm like, that doesn't work, and it doesn't, that the game, we don't start that way. That may build
mhm.
over time. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I know having played Threadbare, it's a different take on how that works. I mean, the relationships is what let you accomplish things more than your own raw ability,
Yeah,
usually.
the only Powered by the Apocalypse I've gotten a chance to play thus far is, Monster of the Week,
Mm.
which, we're currently actually we recorded that game, and, we're in the midst of broadcasting it, releasing it, but, I had a lot of fun with it, but yeah, it is a I wouldn't even call it a game system so much as a framework, but it seems to work best when it has a fairly tight focus, which I think, and especially if you go back, like we were talking a little bit, I think even before we turned the mics on, and recorded things that, some of these games that came out in the 80s and the 90s were much more, here's a bunch of rules, do your own thing with it.
Yeah,
Where
that's the problem I think that Champions or Hero System always had to overcome was it was a gamer's design. It was a game toolkit that you could use to build whatever you want. So it didn't have a tight focus. It had some settings, but it never had really good plug and play settings. And as far as I can tell, Powered by the Apocalypse games are very tightly focused on one thing. The impression that I've heard from some people, they're really good for short games. Not good, I don't know about campaigns, but they're really good for doing whatever they're doing. Like Threadbare is your toys in your basically sentient, walking, talking toys in a post-apocalyptic future where none of the people exist anymore. So, the one game I was in, I was a bag of army men. And the GM was great. He had props, so he puts a bag of army men in front, little plastic army men. So immediately I turned into R. Emery, uh, Arlie Emery. Yeah, I turned into Arlie Emery from Full
Arlie
Metal.
Ermy.
Our soldier from TF2. And then the other time he put a big plastic horse out. Now I live in the Denver area, and I saw that, and I immediately became Lucifer. I killed my owner, or my creator. I'm invulnerable, and so it was a blast with the props. But I mean, there's a number. Like we've talked about this. There's a number of games where some people have said they're great for one shots. They're great for simulating the genre, but their use in a longer term game becomes less and less viable because their focus is very tight on one thing.
Mhm.
And I mean, but there's a ton of indie games that I think they do one thing really well. I
Mhm.
know I played one game of Dogs in the Vineyard, which does that social interaction mechanic about enforcing. I'm trying to remember like you're supposed to be a team of lawgivers coming to a town, finding the problem, resolving the problem, and passing judgment. And it does
Yeah.
that really well. And somebody said you can take that core mechanic, and he did Dogs of the Water Cooler to do interoffice politics, or Dogs of the, and it focused basically on the character reactions and politics and all that. It was not going to be useful at all for any sort of combat game or any sort of, a conflict that was physical. It was all social, but he said it was great for that.
Well, that's the same guy who designed Apocalypse World. It was
Oh,
what
okay.
he did before that, Vince Baker. But yeah, yeah. But I think to me that's, and again we touched on this before. I think I like flexible toolkit games, but I'm kind of one of those people too where sometimes if I've got a concept, I want that game that does the thing that I want to do really well.
Right.
And like you mentioned, the indie market, especially now, is exploding with these things where, man, if you may have to dig a little, but there's a game out there that does that thing you want, or there probably is,
Right.
and does it very, very well without you having to put in the legwork with, be it a GURPS or a hero system or
Right, because heroes like GURPS, here's my view, my opinion, and the way I look at GURPS and champions. GURPS let you do whatever you wanted to do. But, and this is, I've heard this, like the scuttlebutt is, you are stuck with their standardized system for doing what it is you want to do. And for example, their magic system was pretty much, no matter which IP source book you picked up, their magic system was always the same. The story I heard is somebody said, "Hey, Steve, I figured out how we can use GURPS to simulate the magic system in Goblin World. I don't know." And he goes, "That's great, but we're going to use our generic across the board magic system that we establish in GURPS Magic." And it was like, okay. But if you noticed, like the cell system for power, the starship hull system, and all, it was the same. Like, except for I think Traveler. Traveler, they couldn't get away with that. And so Traveler, they were like, yeah, we're going to simulate Traveler using GURPS rules. But GURPS Traveler was really its own, its own thing because it was trying to simulate a different game. But whenever they did anything else like GURPS Humanx or anything or high tech or whatever, it was a generic set of rules that they applied to whatever it was they were doing. So you could do whatever you wanted, but you had to do it using their preset rules. Champions, on the other hand, or Heroes system was, well, you can do whatever you want. You have to figure out how to build it within the rules that we have, which could lead to some really like huge blocks of text describing how a power works. And so with both of those, you have to get your hands really dirty, understand the mechanics, understand the rules, or use a lot of pre-built stuff from products where, here, we made all these powers for you, just plug them in. Now with PMP, what I have found is, first of all, the powers are much more broad stroke.
Mm-hmm.
What the power gives you with and there's some modifiers you can do, lets you do most everything you want to do. You don't have to get into this minutia of this is what it's like. Also, because it's getting away from like the really detailed gear that GURPS and Hero use, and the really detailed rules and distances and range mods and everything, all that gets scrapped. You don't have to worry about it. So the game builds are much simpler. And what I like is that as a GM, I don't have to worry about points anymore. Whenever I did anything in Hero, everything was point totaled. Weapons, vehicles, villains, beasts, whatever. Everything came with a point total because that's how you build. You run down and you get your points and say, this is what this is. In this case, when I'm building in like an enemy, I don't worry about any of that. I just give them whatever they need and we're done. I don't have to worry about points. I can put in cons and pros that improve or degrade a power that makes sense. And one of the things that I love is I can reach a point where I'm like, I don't know how to exactly simulate this power in the rules. Special power. The character can do this. And there's a movie out called The Ritual, which I've seen a couple times and I've read the book. And there's a creature in there called Moder, which means mother. And Moder is supposed to be this movie's been out for a while, so it's supposed to be a child of Loki. It's supposed to be one of the Untun. And I'm like, I want to try building that. That's how I learn, is by building things I see. So I'm building it, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. It has a couple of abilities that really, I don't have to worry about how to exactly make it work. I can just say special power, mark a motor, puts its hand on you and always knows where you are. Special power, blessing a motor, gives you immortality. Boom, I'm done. if you really want, I can give you the character sheet later and be like, that thing's weird. I'm like, sure it is. But
that's gaming, right?
Huh?
That's gaming, right? That
Yeah.
I needed to do this, and see, to me, that's where it sounds like Prowlers and Paragons is kind of hitting that sweet spot where you have enough crunch to say, yes, this is better than this, but you also have that freedom to go, this is just weird and cool, and this is how it works.
Right. Like, technically, now, if somebody could say, well, in Champions, you didn't have to worry about point totals either. I'm like, yeah, it's something I learned very late. But I had produced so much stuff with the idea of it eventually maybe seeing print that it was ingrained in me. Let's make sure the numbers are correct. Also, because I like to put stuff into the Haymaker APA, and I wanted to make sure that it would pass muster for all the other readers. They'd be like, you didn't put any point totals on this. How did you get these numbers? I was like, no, everything's got to fit, everything's got to match, because there's going to be the people to look at it. They're going to point, and they're going to be like, wait, that's I can't use that because you didn't give me viable numbers to understand what its active points are, what its real points, what its total is. So getting away from that was something that made me feel really free. I'm building an atomic monster product right now, and it's great. I can just sit there and be like, let me put some values down, let me get the right powers, let me do this. Yeah, this looks good, and I'm done. I feel much freer creating things. And this becomes kind of important in Well in the Worlds, because the heroes are really the only characters are on points. Now, whenever they level up or milestone, after playtest, I discovered it's the best way to get them to show their power is, look, certain critical point happens, I give you new character sheets, you have 25 more points, and your dice cap went up by 2. And then another 25 points, and the dice cap goes up. And then eventually the dice cap stops, and I give you another 25 points that you can use to spread out. And so they start discovering they have superpowers. Everybody else they meet, I don't have to worry about that. I just let me give you something that they can do, and boom, good. And I can just build without a lot of crunch and worry, and create things that they can, that are meant to be their opponents. And it's very quick. And on the fly, I can be like, oh, we're going to get into a fight with those guys. Oh, hold on. They are, they're city guard, they're 4-die threat, and, let's roll. So you're right. Once you get a hang of how it works, and I have a bunch of character sheets that I've done up that have later on, like off this thread. If you ever want to sit in on one of these, not the Twitch show, but one of the other 2 games and see it in action, certainly. But yeah, you've got a really good point there, that there's a sweet spot between all the crunching you have to do in GURPS and in Hero, and even in D&D, because trying to figure out the challenge rating of a monster is more an art than a science. Like I reach a point where I'm like, that's good enough. I don't know if it's accurate. That's good enough, man. I'm tired of going back and forth on this. And with this, it's not a perfect. Now, let me be honest. It's not a perfect system. There are parts where I know I can see room for improvement, but I think that's perfect. That's true of any system. You can always say that needs to be written clear, or there's a power this power isn't quite worked right. That's fine. It proves that I think, but when people point that out too, it proves they're interested in the system. It proves they're interested in how it works. The PMP, they created an errata page on the PMP Discord, which I don't look into it a whole lot. I got so much going on, but apparently it exploded, and I'm like, yeah. I mean, there's people going, but it proves that they're playing the game, they're reading the book, and they want to know more. So I think on one hand, it's a good thing. If nobody is commenting on the game, either it's perfect, which is not true, or they're just not that vested that they care deep enough to ask and raise their hand and say, is this how this is supposed to work?
Yeah, well, but that brings, like, yeah, it doesn't work for this scenario you ran into, and I remember a couple of things here. One, we interviewed Jay Little quite a while ago, who designed Warhammer Third Edition, Fantasy Third Edition, did the FFG Star Wars, it's done the 2D20 system for Modiphius, a bunch of different stuff. And he said, no matter how much playtesting you do, and you go, yeah, these are edge cases. He said, when you take your playtesting sample size, and then you release it into the wild, that sample size just became a drop in the bucket.
Right.
And so you are going to have people out there in actual playing that hit these edge cases, and because of the internet, you're going to hear about them.
Yeah.
And you can't plan for all of them.
No, you can't. This is actually, I know one of the big complaints I heard from people about Hero System 6th edition was the sheer size of the core books. There's a character creation book that's this thick, and there's a combat book that's this thick. Now, this is all audio, so of course you can see my fingers, they can't. But we're talking 400 some odd, 500, I don't know, huge thick books.
Mhm.
And I think part of it was Steve Long was trying to write in such a way that he was answering all the questions. And I also think it turned out all it did was make people ask more questions.
Mhm.
It was not the one source, this covers all the bases. It's never going to do that. They were two $50 books. It was $100 to get into Hero 6th edition if you bought those two books. And they're huge and they cover everything. There's tons of examples, there's tons of sample powers, there's tons of explanation about, how powers work and what they do. And it still didn't. There's still people I know that were like, Mr. Long, but what about, and it just gives you, it's just a headache.
Yeah.
I am not the kind of game designer that designs games from scratch. I'm the kind of guy that had, like, everything I created for Hero was me taking the rules and like, here, let me give you a source book for this. Let me give you a source book for this. Let me give you a source book for this. I mean, I did some innovative, I guess I would call it innovative, like design of, hey, here's some new limitations, or here's a new way of doing things. But I've been playing Hero for a really long time, but I've never been asked to create a game from scratch. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I have that kind of mind. But I can take something that somebody else has written up and be like, oh, I can use this to create this. Here, let me show you these creatures or these devices or these characters or this setting I've created.
I think that's just as valuable, right?
Well, no,
You
I
know
think it is. I'm
you
just
know,
saying, I don't have quite the same experience of people coming to me going, but I don't understand because, fortunately, I'm not the rules guy. um,
well, the other thing I'm reminded of, by this conversation, I was listening to Ken Hite and Robin D. Law's podcast, and they were talking about playtesting. And I don't exactly remember how they said it, but the point was, listen to all the feedback you get from your playtesters about what the problems are. Don't necessarily listen to them on how to fix them.
oh, no, that's very true. That's very true. If I may, you
Mhm.
we were talking about Well of the Worlds.
Yes.
Um,
Like to get back to that, actually.
is there any question? I mean, I don't think I've given you just a taste. What would be your follow-up question now that I've given you like a brief idea? Is there, or do you want me to just ramble on it?
Well, I was going to say, when, we're, because of the magic of time that is podcasting, we're 3 weeks out from, you had told me you're going to be launching it on Kickstarter,
April
but
4th.
when everyone gets to hear this, it'll be approximately, at the earliest, a week before that.
Right.
So, what do you want to tell people about it? Because
Uh,
get the word out, that type
right.
of thing. You mentioned you have the stream where you're playing through some of it.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the base idea is, so let me actually illustrate what the well is by describing two or three things that influenced me a lot. The first thing that influenced me was an anime called El Hazard, and it came out in the 90s, and apparently it is one of the first isekai anime. Now, to go back real quick, isekai means other world, alternate world. In the West, we might call it a portal fantasy. And the general idea is characters from location A, which is usually the here and now, get transported to a fantastical world and have to survive.
mhm,
In El Hazard, an object is discovered at the high school, where the main characters either teach or attend, and it is activated and it sucks several characters from Earth into another world where they discover it's this fantastic John Carter-esque world. Well, I shouldn't say John Carter-esque. Because everybody wears clothes for starters, but they are transported into a fantastical world of both high and low technology and amazing vista. And there's a war going on, and they get sucked into a war against this enemy, and they all have convenient plot powers that let them be part of the narrative. One
mhm,
character can activate machines by touching them and make them work. One character can see through illusions. One character is, once they stop drinking and smoking, like the less they drink and smoke, the stronger they get. Until finally, at a climatic point, they've been imprisoned and denied anything but water, and discover they are stupidly strong, and of course can defeat the stupid strong monster. And then one person, the villain, ends up having like tactical genius, and therefore can command becomes the commander of the enemy. And so over the course of 6 episodes, the fate of the world, the universe, or this world is decided. And it's a fun romp. It's very pulpish, has that pulp feel to it. It's got beautiful graphics. It's got some great characters. Apparently, the English dub is actually pretty good, and the guy who dubbed the English villain has like almost outlaughs the Japanese voice actor when the guy goes into maniacal fits of laughter. So another thing that influenced me was something called, and you're going to notice a theme in a moment, was something called Castle Perilous. Now, Castle Perilous is a building, a castle that has 144 aspects, which are like doorways to other realms. And it sits in a realm all its own, and you can wander into it. One character wanders into it, but he goes down a hallway, and it keeps going down a hallway, and he's like, shouldn't I have left the building and gotten into the parking garage? And he exits into the castle, and somebody else comes in through like a window and all this. And after you've been into the castle, which is immense, it is gigantic, you begin to learn, okay, there's some rooms, some things are steady. You begin to innately understand how to get to important parts. That's where the dining room is. That's where my bedroom is. That's where that is. The rest of the castle shifts. You also begin to discover that you have a talent. One character becomes a super swordsman as long as they're in the castle. One character becomes a magician as long as they're in the castle. One character, blah, blah, blah. They all gain powers. And there's 8 novels, and they go to other realms, and the castle gets invaded a couple of times, and all this stuff goes on. They're all out of print. I used to have them on my Kindle, and then my Kindle died, so I don't know if I'm ever going to get another Kindle. But they're pretty cool. Now, the third one was World of Tears. Philip Jose Farmer wrote 5-6 novels set around the idea that there are these lords and ladies, capital L, who all inhabit their own private cosmoses or realms. And within those realms, they do whatever they want. And it turns out Earth is just another one. We are in an artificial world. We are not, what we think is deep space isn't. Everything was planned and built for us. So no one knows where the original evolved universe is. And our hero in the first novel, I think it's called Maker of Universes, wanders through a gate into a world where he becomes young, he becomes strong, he becomes healthy, and he realizes he's on a very artificial world. It's basically a flat plate that rises up as you go, and so each tier is a separate environment and culture and society and so on. And then he eventually discovers why, all these things about the world and such. He doesn't gain superpowers so much, but the artificial constructed world is fascinating. The first book is actually pretty cool. It's a great pulp adventure. I think they all go downhill pretty quick after that. I think the castle, there's like a couple of sequels to El Hazard, and there's a TV show. The original is really good. The rest of them not so much. The novels for Castle Perilous vary. I think they're all reasonably good. And then there's a ton of other stuff out there that I've looked at that also has in some cases you gain powers, in some cases you're just running around this alternate world, like John Carter, Almeric by Robert E. Howard, which is terrible, but it was his foray into that same sort of storytelling. The Doomfare is a Coramundi, which is a M113 from Vietnam, wanders and gets sucked from Vietnam into a fantasy world. So you get to see guys with M16s and 50 caliber machine guns and white phosphorus fight a dragon. And then I'd have to open up the file. There's a file, I could list off this huge collection. Actually, the most recent Stephen King Fairy Tale is very much the same sort of thing.
Okay.
So the idea being is that our heroes, our characters, are normal people from the here and now who, in this game that I've been running, get on a flight to Bermuda because one of the taglines is, this is where the Bermuda Triangle ends. And they're on Oceanic Airlines Flight 907, which is a gag because Oceanic Airlines is the airline that you use whenever a plane crashes, and no airline wants to be associated with that plane crash. It's the airline from Lost and a couple other shows. And I forget 907. I don't remember if that was from a show or not. But anyways, so they encounter turbulence. They wake up. They're in a wreck. There's only the 5 or 6 characters. I don't know where anybody else went. Most of the plane is gone, and they're obviously not in Bermuda. So what the adventure there is: where are we? Can we get home? Where are all the people? Why is the world the way it is? And who is hunting us? And then they start to develop superhuman powers. So they become movers and shakers, and eventually they want answers. So they make their way from the edge of the world to the center of the world and get those answers. And in my one Friday night game, they are 40 sessions in. That's the longest I've run any one game. They're probably going to go to 50-ish, and they're about 3/4 of the way through the story. And they've spent a lot of time doing side quests. So every time I run this, also the number of sessions gets longer. First time I ran it, it was 16 6-hour games. Then it was 24, roughly 3 to 4 hour games. Then it was 36, and now we're at 40. But they are loving it.
Is this kind of a campaign framework or a setting or somewhat both?
It can be. Like, for example, you could have your superhero team wander into this world and solve a problem and get back out. You could play natives who, through whatever reason, develop powers, because there are a lot of native wonder workers. And you could do sort of that whooshy Celtic myth, fantasy supers, exalted style adventures. You can do the outsiders, and you could do a theme. Like, I do a bunch of random people, but you could be like, hey, that transporter malfunctioned, so 6 red shirts from Star Trek find themselves in a different universe and have to figure out how to get back. Or you could do Stargate. Yeah, we regularly, make venture in there, and we're trying to explore. It depends on the framework and how you want to do it and how much you want to surprise the players and how much, because I think the part of the fun of any isekai portal fantasy story is the characters learning the world as the players learning the world as the characters do. They see, and of course the fun of me is I know all the answers and I listen to their random, guesswork and all that. And every now and then I've handed somebody a resolve because they've gotten really close to the truth, and I'm just like, here, that was a pretty cool guess. I like that. Here, have a resolve. And the world is not technologically advanced. So you're going, so the characters also get that culture shock of going from, it's like, I'm having to date myself. It's like the old Gilligan's Island song. No power, no electricity, no single luxury. So the characters also have to deal with being in a world where everything is, handmade, muscle power, wind power, water power, and the idea that, everything you take for granted isn't here anymore. And what do you do? And some of them want to try to improve the lot of the people around them. First, the prime directive, what's that? Some severely misunderestimate what's going on. It's like, no, they totally understand some of the things you're talking about, even if they express it different. Part of it is, the mythology and legends and everything that you deal with. Ringworld, by the way, was another huge influence. Especially
read some of that.
Yeah. Ringworld, in fact, had a lot of influences on some elements of how I put everything together. So, and then, of course, you start to learn that there's other people with powers, and sometimes you run into them, and sometimes you have to fight them. And what's interesting is, in some cases, the question of the use of violence comes up. Like, I'm just a normal school teacher, and now I have to fight guys who want to hurt me, and I have to hurt them back. Granted, most players just roll with the, we're adventurers now. But if you really wanted to do that psychological deep dive, I guess you could. But you are forced into the role of being protagonist, whether you like it or not. And it's interesting to see some people take the reins and run with it.
Okay. And this is all, you've got this, and I don't remember if you said this before we started recording. You had originally started working on this as Champions, but it's going to be released for Prowlers and Paragons.
Yeah, originally it was a Champions. It was all done up for, well, okay, I won't say all. Originally it was a Champions campaign, and I had put some work into it, but not all of it. And then when I decided to convert it to PMP, I went pretty much dove with both feet right into it. I have 160, somewhere between 150 and 175,000 words of content. It's divided into roughly 6 products. There is the Well of the World. I call it Well of the Worlds, Welcome to the Well. which is the core setting book. It breaks down the inhabitants, some of the animals, some of the plants, what the setting is like, some locations, some alterations of the core rules, which mainly are the gritty combat rules, and some notes about how gear works. Here's some sample characters. Here's the villains and the meta plot foes. Here's a bunch of other stuff. That's about 60,000 words. Then I have a Wonder Workers book, which is 60 to 70 characters, some of them full character sheets, some of them little stat blocks, which are friends and foes and neutrals and other characters that you can interact with. And then I have an idea for an NPC book, which is here's a description of everybody that gets mentioned somewhere. And there's no stat blocks, but there's notes about, like, because some of these characters don't need stat blocks. But here's an NPC gazetteer. Here's a places gazetteer. Here is a folklore book, which has all the origin stories and legends and myths and culture hero myths about characters and peoples. And then here is what I want to do is here is Against the Masters of the World. Here is a full X number and however long it takes you to run adventure that'll let you experience like all these locations and places and give you a full, beginning, middle, end campaign that you can run.
Cool. You said that'll kick off April 4th, correct?
Yeah, as far as I know, the only thing we're trying to kick right now is the core book. The rest of this we'll have to see, because with Blood and Justice, the Blood and Justice book got released, and then the next follow-up book was Nocturne by Night, which was the villains book, and then I know there might be other stuff. So, I have to see how well we do and what happens and how much of this will be produced the first time, and then what we do with all the follow-ups. I mean, some of it may end up being Surbrook Press products where I just put it together and release it, direct as a PDF, and we're not going to worry about printing and shipping books. But hopefully by next Genghis Khan or even Tacticon, we'll have some physical books for people to look at if you come out, if you're in Denver for either of those conventions.
Yeah, I'm in Pittsburgh, so Denver's a little bit of a jump, but
I used to have a job that let me fly from Baltimore. I lived in Columbia, Maryland. I'd fly from Baltimore out to Denver every February and come out, because Genghis is a wonder. Well, it's been rebuilt back into a wonderful convention. But the biggest convention I know near Pittsburgh is Penzic Wars.
Okay, that we actually have one. It's I want to say it's about its third or fourth year. It's called the Pittsburgh Gaming Expo.
Oh, okay.
We got asked to attend last year. I've since become friends with the organizers. It's a really cool little, and it's multi-gaming. Like, there's a lot of video game stuff from like old arcade and pinball cabinets and platforms, and tabletop stuff and cosplay stuff.
There's a convention in DC that started up just as I left that was like that. And by the way, the Penzic Wars is not really a convention. That is the Society for Creative Anachronism.
That's what I was thinking it was.
I went to like 10 or 12 of those.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a cool little thing, and they're kind of getting their feet under them good. We had a real good show last year. They've got the whole convention center this coming year instead of just the half of it they had last year. And as I tell people, if you're a real horror movie buff, it also happens to be across the parking lot from the mall where they filmed the original Dawn of the Dead.
Okay.
Like, literally.
Well, I know Mobius will come out with, if arrangements can be made, because we don't have a lot of money either. Mobius will is willing to come out to attend various conventions and to show off the product. It may not be me, maybe some other people, because I know they're going to CubaCon, which is in Austin. No, it's it's in Texas. And DungeonCon will be at Tacticon. We always go to Genghis Con because those are our local cons here in Denver. Dungeons in California. And there's some others that we're trying to make it out to. But I don't think anybody's in your area to come out and demo PMP, unfortunately. Like I said, if you ever want to sit in one of our sessions.
You also mentioned you have a Twitch stream going for this right now?
Yeah, I would have to contact the people who are. I'm just running it, and I can get you some URLs. I can get you some URLs. Wow, my age. I can get you some links to Mobius. My whole section on Mobius is being rebuilt. I don't know. I don't know, but also if you want to see a lot of my stuff right now on Drive-Thru, just put in Surbrook. You'll see things that I've written or worked on that aren't PMP. But I can get you I want to get you the link to the backer kit so you can sign up to be alerted. I need to get you the link.
For our purposes tonight, I mean, you can email it all to me, and I'll make sure I put it all in the show notes so any of the listeners want to check it out can just scroll down and click.
Yeah, I tossed some links out to everybody, to some of my other gaming groups, and I got to find them again. But yeah, the Twitch show was on its first episode. I told them this could go into the 30s and 40s. So I don't know how long we're going to run it. I'm willing to keep running it as long as they'll have me run it, as long as they enjoy it. They do seem to be finding it a lot of fun. So,
well, there you go.
Anything else?
No, I was going to say, before we start wrapping up, anything else you want to give a shout out to, promote of your own work?
Like I said, if you're interested in seeing what I've worked on, you could go to DriveThruRPG and put in Surbrook, Surbrook, and you'll find a bunch of stuff that I've worked on that's in PDF there. Or you go to the Hero Games website and go to their store and do the same thing, and you'll see everything I've done. A lot of my independent champion stuff that I've done at Surbrook Press is up there.
Okay, cool.
All of this is being revised too. I got some good feedback on how to improve the layout, so I'm working my way. I'm gonna hold up a sheet of paper that only our host can see. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff there, but
full sheet, 5 columns wide, or 2 sheets.
That's because there's a system. There's a system list there. I mean, some of this stuff is actually for more than one system. I have a product on how to run medieval tournaments. That's for Pathfinder 2nd edition. Somebody converted it for me for 5e, Hero, and Savage Worlds. And I have Here Be Dragons, which is a medieval bestiary. And when I say medieval, I mean accurate, like not, so I mean, it has things like the actual basilisk, the actual Ketoblepus, the actual Lurkata, and island whales and stuff in it. And it's for like 5e, Pathfinder, Hero, and Savage Worlds. But a lot of the stuff I'm going to be doing in the future, I'm going to do GM sourcebook content. I'm going to be calling it the Professor's Guide to, and it'll be things like the 3 products that I just completed. One is on money, called Filthy Lucre, and it's all about how to do money systems for your fantasy games and get you off the gold standard and get you off the decimal standard, because nobody in the Middle Ages used gold as their primary coin. It was all silver, and until the United States did 100 cents to the dollar, nobody in Europe used a decimal system. So you got stuff like England, which had quarter pennies, half pennies, pennies, 2 pence, 6 pence, 12 pence, and then 24 pennies was a shilling. And and then it was 240 pennies to the pound. And they didn't convert the decimal until like 1971.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
All right.
And then I'm going to be doing independent Prowlers and Paragons stuff. I've got a couple things I got to work about getting it uploaded or getting it to the people to go up on the drive-through and such. But basically, keep watching the Prowlers and the Mobius Worlds publishing webpage. Surbrook Press does not have a webpage, but keep watching that. And you'll see my stuff as I get it completed and out.
Very, very cool. All right. So, given how long you've been playing games and some of the stuff you've talked about, I think you're particularly qualified to play our little Game of the Week segment.
Game of the Week. Game of the Week.
Feel free to comment, as I'm talking about what I'm talking about here. But my Game of the Week this week is going to be a game that I found, and I've not played this. I just happened to find it, but it seems like it's kind of a cool little light thing. If you just want the PDF, it's all of $7 whole. And it's a game called Save the Universe. And what it is little 90-page PDF. It says tyranny and cruelty have spread across the galaxy and only you can stop it. And so it's a very narrative story-focused game where you just sort of make up characters and then go have adventures. It's not intended for any like real hard sci-fi, but I think based on what I'm reading it's kind of in like we mentioned with the Powered by the Apocalypse, where you kind of communally make your party and then set off and see what happens and bounce back and forth. So it's a very collaborative, story focused game, low prep, just do your thing. And like I said, it's called Save the Universe. PDF will run you all of $7, or if you want the print on demand softcover in black and white and the PDF, it'll set you back all of $10 currently. Regular price is 17. I don't know if it's on GM's day sale or which will be done by the time anyone hears this, but still, $7, $17. Can't go wrong, and I'm sure if nothing else, it can provide you inspiration for other things you want to do.
Oh, so my turn.
Yep.
I'm going to mention 3.
Okay.
Because I'm very interested. I was very interested in all 3 of these, and I will have to skim because I can't give the level of detail you just did. But the 3 that I'm going to mention are Alien, which
Okay.
I've been reading through. I read through the core books, and I found it fascinating. I think it's at times it's a little too much for me. There's like stress markers and oxygen markers and ammo counters and
Mhm.
everything. But I think it does a wonderful job of capturing that feel of stress of the Alien movies. And
Mhm.
even if you don't play it, the source books, both the core source book and the Colonial Marine source book, are loaded with wonderful ideas and details and ships and gear and companies. So the next one is called Death in Space.
Okay.
Now, Death in Space is another space. It's like Firefly in the distant future, where everything's even more run down.
Okay.
Um, I couldn't 100% grok it. I read it. I'm like, I had mixed thoughts about it. The reason why I recommend it, though, is that even if you just look at a PDF, it's from the same guys that make Morkborg
Okay.
and Vaesen and all that. Free League. It's actually another Free League game, just like Alien.
Free League or Stockholm Cartel. They're affiliated, but they're not the same company.
Right. Okay. But it's called the thing is though is the graphic layout has always struck me. It is the whole book is black paper with white text, and they use these vector drawings to show ships and everything. So it gives you this really like level of despair feeling for it's the end of the universe. I mean, I have a hard time. Like one of the problems I have is I don't know when it's supposed to take place, and it's and I'm not and it seems a little hard to understand exactly how you would run a campaign, but visually, just looking at it, very evocative. And then the other one is Mothership. And Mothership, I didn't get a chance to play it. I have massive hearing loss, and my ability to play in crowded RPG convention rooms is not good. But I was so fascinated. I'm waiting for the big
The
Kickstarter
box.
that I ordered to show up. And it strikes me as being less crunchy than Alien, but more accessible than Death in Space. And personally, I've wondered if I could use it to run a more straight up non-horror, because I would love to adapt the old Traveler Adventure and cut out all the boring parts, but turn it into like a cool mini series and run the Traveler Adventure and something simpler than Traveler. And Mothership looks to be very fast play, and see if I can work with that. But I'm waiting to get like the big box set. But I think the 3 of those, when you look at science fiction games that all 3 of which have a level of that horror aspect or just despair aspect to them, I think all 3 just fascinate me on one level or another.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you mentioned Alien, and I haven't picked it up. I almost did, but the guy who did a lot of the flavor writing for the Alien series for Free League is Andrew Gaska, who, if I'm not mistaken, one of his either current or previous jobs was he was the actual keeper of, I don't know what the technical title is, but he was the keeper of what was canon for that universe.
That usually they call that a Bible.
Yeah, but like that was what he was the official guy in charge of what was.
That's a job I kind of would love to have. Like, well, because they call it usually they call that a writer's Bible. Well, that's the term I've heard, that if you're
Yeah.
that this is what they give, this is what you get when you're gonna when you're gonna write a novel in Star Trek or in Star Wars, or if you're gonna write a screenplay. Well, screenplay sometimes ignore it, but if you're a contractor brought in to work on X IP, they'll give you the writers, but this is what you can and can't do. But
Mhm.
yeah, that is a heck of a job, because Alien is splattered over a slew of books, a lot of
Mhm.
books, comics, there's movies.
But
I
yeah.
read, so I am old enough. I don't know how old you are, but I was 10 in 1970. I was 12 in 1979. And I remember walking into a Kmart and seeing an Alien action figure in a box that was like 12 inches tall Now, I'd never seen the movie, had no idea, but I was like just totally like had no idea what this weird toy was from this movie that was apparently utterly terrifying. And one of the coolest things somebody said about the initial Alien movie was much like Jaws, how brilliantly they didn't show you the monster. So I mean, there were some shots where you kind of get an idea what it looked like, but what somebody said was you go to 1979, you grab a guy who has just walked out of it, the movie, and you say, what did it look like? And he's going to be like, it was big and black and steel teeth and tubes. Like the fact that you couldn't tell exactly what it was made it that much more creepy and frightening. And it was a
Hmm.
brilliant thing that they did with that.
Well,
It's one of
I
the
mean,
things.
Lovecraft did that a lot.
Well, yeah, Lovecraft, to get the idea that you couldn't understand what you were seeing, he only described things in broad strokes in that purple prose. There's a movie called The Host. There's a Korean monster movie called The Host. And one of the things that's actually really amazing about that is that very quickly into the movie, they show you the monster in broad daylight because it's running across a park on a sunny day and you get to see exactly what it looks like. Now, the CGI is pretty good, so it doesn't look like really dumb, but it also gives you an idea of just how creepy it is because you get to see it. It's one of the things why people complained about Godzilla 2014 was because they're like, I want to see more of the monster, but that was deliberate. Every time you got a good look at Godzilla, he'd pull the camera away. You got just enough to see it, and then he would pull it away. Granted, we all came to Godzilla movies to watch monsters fight, so you kind of wanted a little more of that, which they gave us in the follow-ups. But it also, though, kept you wanting more, which is a role-playing technique too that you can do. It's,
Mhm.
it's you describe just enough and let the player fill in the rest. Because in horror games, nothing creeps a player out more than the player themselves.
Exactly, exactly.
We could go on for 2 hours on this subject. We better call it soon.
Yeah, and as you were talking about the layout, Death in Space,
Yeah.
I don't know, if you're that into the cyberpunk genre, but if you've seen, again, this is from the same people who did Morkborg, it's called Cyborg.
There was a I don't know if it was the company, I guess. Well, there was a company rep or something like that at Genghis, and I did not see that. I know that Mork Borg is like unreadable, or just I mean, so many people have joked that it's unreadable because of the way it's written, but I've never had a chance to actually look at it.
It's very chaotically laid out. I can't think of the guy's name right now, but the guy who actually did the layout is a professional layout artist,
Right. It's
but
deliberate.
he intentionally broke all the rules.
Right. Did you ever hear of a game called Hole?
Yes,
Human Occupied
from
Land?
White Wolf back in the '90s.
Yeah, which was also unreadable because it was like written in handwriting and looked like it was written on like paper napkins because it was a deliberate layout choice to get you that dystopian post-apocalyptic feel.
But,
Uh,
the
yeah,
the the same guy did the layout and everything for this game called Cyborg,
okay.
which is a very again, it's kind of rules light, very gritty, slimy, fast-paced cyberpunk game, but the layout style in that to me is just so evocative. If you ever get to look at it, it
I'll see what
just
I
from
can.
an artistic standpoint, it's really cool, and that's actually, I think, one of the reasons I didn't back Mothership is because the Kickstarter was out for both of them at the same time, and I'm like,
Oh,
which one?" I'm like, Cyborg wins out."
okay.
But yeah, no, Mothership is one of the ones that's been on my list for a while to check out.
I would like to try it out. It's interesting thing. I have a Monday night gaming group, and we've been talking about what to do once we finish Massive Darkness, which is just a board game. And I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do after that. I wouldn't mind trying Mothership. I don't know if all the players would want to try it. So,
Mhm.
but, yeah, I got a couple Kickstarters I'm waiting on. Heck,
Waiting on like half a dozen, I think.
hang on. Oh,
Uh,
so I got to tell you the latest Kickstarter. I'm not sure it's going to Kickstarter or not, but the latest thing that I'm looking at is nothing to do with games, but Beehive Books is I live in a library. There's 33,550 books in this house, including gaming books, including graphic novel collections, including really expensive prestige press books. And one of the prestige presses I like is Beehive. And I want to get this book only for the art, if nothing else. But they got Mike Mignola of Hellboy fame to do 50 illustrations for Pinocchio with the guy that wrote Lemony Snicket doing annotations to explain sort of like what you're reading. Because I've seen this. I have a annotated Wind in the Willows where he like breaks down, and I have an annotated Hobbit where he like, oh, by the way, this passage was different, or this guy is actually this in North Myth, and it's going to be $100, and I have 2 of their books that are like this, and they're totally worth it. I have Algernon Blackwood's The Willows and Lacaphato Hearn's Quidon in their slipcase, full color, gorgeous. And the moment they said Mike Mignola doing the art, I'm like, I don't care if I don't even read the story. A book of his art. Oh yeah. I think it's going to Kickstarter. I don't know. I gotta check it out. They're talking about reserving it on the website for $100, so I gotta see. I think it is going to Kickstarter, so I'll wait and see. But
That sounds cool as hell. All right. Well, we've been jabbering away for a while here, and I'm sure we could keep on talking about all kinds of things, but in the interest of everybody and everything, I think we'll wrap it up here.
If Steve and the other Steve, if the other Steve wants to have another talk where we just tangent between whatever, I'm more than willing to come back and discuss all sorts of stuff with you guys.
Sounds really cool. Thank you very much for taking the time to come talk with us. Tell us about Prowlers and Paragons.
Yeah.
Well, the worlds, all this cool stuff. Sounds like a really, really cool Supers game.
I know there's some people, some of my former players have told me it's one of the best things they've ever played through, and some of them really like the setting. So there are some definite fans out there.
Excellent. So I guess with all that, for listeners of the show, if you want to check us out, we're on Facebook, Twitter. If you want to help support us on Patreon, you can do that. We have a drive-through affiliate link that you can get to through show notes. We have a Discord server where you can come chatter at us, tell us how crazy you think we are, too many tangents we go on, whatever you want to tell us, or drop us an email. Again, links to all that's in the show notes. And with all that, I'd like to remind everyone to be kind to each other and get out there and play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast, on Discord at Me and Steve RPGs, and as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.